Afternoon, everybody. This is our chance to welcome Dave. He goes by Dave Trott, Congressman Trott from the 11th District of Michigan and Duke Law graduate of the class of 1985. Welcome back to Duke Law School.
Nice to be back here.
Do you see anything that you recognize?
Well, I recognize this room because I took my very last law school final in this room, sitting right there in the second row, and I sat down next to a buddy of mine, and he said, "Trotter, this is a great day to be in America. They're not doing this in Russia today." And then I also had my torts class in this room, and had many hours where I sat up there, and Professor Christie stood beneath a no smoking sign, smoking a cigar. So. And I also recognize Professor Beal up there, and nice to see her again. I lobbied earlier today to have her explain to me why she gave me a 2.7 in my crim law class, but she said the statute of limitations has run on that, so you can't get into it. So.
Well, we can take a look at that grade.
Okay.
So I thought that what we might do is focus on on this last phase of your career. We can work our way back. But you just to go quickly, I mean, you left law school in 1985, Duke. You went back to Michigan, where your dad was a lawyer. You joined his firm, and you made quite a success of it there. And then you decided to run for Congress. What year was that?
Well, I decided in 2013 to run in the 2014 election.
So let's just focus on that and then what came after it. So how does, here you are, you've been practicing law for quite some time. How does, what happens to somebody like you that causes them to want to run for Congress at that point, and how do you do it?
Yeah. Well, it's usually a closed head injury is the first thing that happens. Well, I'd spent 30 years in business, roughly, and had accomplished many of my goals in business and law. Before I got to Duke, I graduated from U of M in 1981, a year early, and I spent a year in Washington working for a congressman there, Bill Broomfield. So my experience and time in Washington really got my interest in public service, and particularly in Washington. And then I got busy, with business and law, and then in 2012, and many of you probably wouldn't know this about my seat in particular, but there was an incumbent Congressman, Thaddeus McCotter, who'd been there for 10 years, and he's really one of the first congressmen in almost 100 years to get thrown off the ballot in Michigan because his signatures were fraudulent. Someone in his staff just made a Xerox copy of in Michigan, to get on the ballot, even if you're an incumbent, you have to file 200 or 1,000 signatures of people in the district who want you to be on the ballot, and they went and made Xerox copies of about 800 copies from the previous 2010 election. And so when that happened, he got thrown off the ballot, and the only person on the ballot was Kerry Bentivolio. And at that time, it was a pretty Republican district. And Bentivolio was kind of a glad fly, never had a chance of winning. And so when he won in 12, I really started thinking about running against him in the primary, because I thought he was just the wrong person to represent us.
You thought you thought you could win, and did you see this as a long-term move, or did you have a sense of where it might lead, or?
I didn't, and I really had no plan other than I thought it was a good time in my life to try and run. I didn't think in my heart of hearts that there are a few different kinds of people that serve in Congress. There are folks usually from extremely safe districts, Democrat and Republican, who go there and serve for 20 years. And they're backbenchers, and they don't really do anything, and it's the best job they'll ever get, so they take a paycheck and get a decent pension after 20 years and retire. There are people that go there for 20 years and really have an impact. There are people that go there for 4 or 6 years and use it to run for governor or senator. So I knew, because of my prior career, that a statewide election would be difficult, which we can get into. I knew I wouldn't want to be a backbencher just calling it in to collect a paycheck. That's not why I went there. But I also knew candidly that my wife really wouldn't necessarily be on board with going and spending 20 years there. Some wives go to D.C. and they get or spouses go to D.C. and they get very involved, and that I knew that wouldn't be my situation. So I was a little bit flummoxed about what it would hold if I got there. But at the same time, I knew that however long I served, I could do it the right way, and so I don't regret going. Although when I ran, a good buddy of mine came up to me and said, "Trotter, here's a check. you can use this for your campaign or use it to get counseling. I have no idea why you're doing this, right?
We should say that you've announced that you're not running again.
Right.
You were reelected almost 2 years ago.
Yes, in 16, yeah.
And then, so your term will finish, and then you'll do something else. So you'll have had 4 years.
Which is a lot of people retire after 6 years. And I know a bunch of folks that got elected with me in 14 that have already told me that they'll run again in 18 and they'll be done. Candidly, and doesn't reflect well on our process, but the truth of it is a lot of people if you serve for 5 years, there's some nominal pension you get and there's some break you get in your health insurance. So a lot of people really do serve for 3 terms because they can get that. That wasn't a motivator for me. And so then early in January, after my reelect in this year, my wife came to me and said, now, the most you'd serve is 1 more term, right? You're not going to, that's it. And then I started thinking, well, if I'm not going to be there for a long time, what's the point in maybe running a 3rd time? And candidly, my election in 18 is going to be particularly difficult. I'm the most targeted seat in Michigan, and our president is not making it easy for moderates like myself, so I think it'd be a tough election. I wasn't necessarily scared of that. In fact, there's part of me that was intrigued by taking on Steve Bannon, but that's another conversation. So.
Well, we can have that. You've told me essentially nothing is off limits, so.
It might be different if I was running again. But,
yeah, I think we can all appreciate that, but we can benefit from your candor now. So why don't we just say your spouse has all kinds of things going on and has had her own distinguished career in Michigan. She was a magistrate in the juvenile court or in the
state district court. And yeah, my wife's a pretty amazing person. So she got an MBA at night while she was working at Ford. And then she got a law degree at night at Wayne State in Detroit while she was having our 3 children. So pretty amazing individual. Then she went and was a magistrate in the courts for 5 years. And then she became an assistant attorney general trying child abuse cases in Detroit, terminating parental rights. And then has since gone on to lead a pretty big organization in Southeast Michigan that deals with child abuse and getting therapy and doing the forensic interviews for the prosecutors.
So, I mean, it's a career difficulty, isn't it, for people who are married? You've got one person's got their own career going on probably back in the home state, and then you're expected to be in D.C. much of the time, and that has... Yeah,
it's a good question. It kind of leads me to a lot of people say, what's your biggest surprise in serving in Congress? And my biggest surprise, and early on my district manager told me to stop saying this. I said, I'm not going to stop saying this. My biggest surprise has been the caliber of the people in Congress. The people are quality people, Democrats and Republicans. They're intelligent, hardworking, more often than not capable, there for the right reason, trying to make a difference. And it's interesting because people say, well, what do you think of Congress? And Congress typically has a 9% approval rating. So it was interesting. When I was running, I was a lawyer who represented banks trying to get to Congress. I didn't know if I was going up or down the food chain of the least respected professions, but I think my next job will be a used car salesman. And, but people say, what do you think of Congress? I don't think much of Congress, 9% approval rating, right? What do you think of your congressperson? Oh, he or she's a good person. I like my person. And they typically are. And where I'm going with this is, serving in Congress is not a job, it's a way of life. And to have your spouse doing something different. Again, in some ways, I ran when our youngest left for college. And I thought, this is a perfect time. We're empty nesters. It'd be a good time for us to go do this. In some ways, and this sounds a little convoluted, and I guess my message to all of you is there's a time and place for everything in your life, so just think about that. And we had a conversation over lunch about what your next step may be. Yep. You know, if you had some interesting opportunity present itself in 2019, you might look at it and go, gosh, that would have been fascinating when I was 40, but now's not the right time. And in some ways, if I was in Congress when I was 40, when we had 3 little kids, soccer practice, and homework, it would have been a better time.
And then they all would have moved, maybe.
Moved, or we each would have been busy with our own lives. My wife is retired from the AG's office, and so she says, you know, I thought we were going to Paris, and you took a hard right and went to D.C., you know. So.
Well, so let's go back to 2013, and you're thinking of running.
Right.
So how did, you know, somebody out here, presumably will think of running someday for Congress or something else. So what do you do? You don't just sort of say, okay, I'm a candidate. Yeah. Who do you call? How do you get into that?
Well, you have to, find a consultant and a campaign manager and a media advisor and a pollster, and start to do a baseline poll to figure out where you are, what kind of name recognition do you have. My prior career, I did mortgage foreclosures for every bank and mortgage company in the country, so we did some basically opposition research on myself to figure out what the attack points were going to be. We did a focus group where we mocked up some commercials, pro and con against me. And it's funny, we sat down with our pollster, a guy named Adam Geller from New Jersey, a great pollster. He does a lot of national campaigns. And we sat down at the beginning of the meeting. My wife said, now, we're not going to do any negative commercials, right? And this guy, Adam Geller, looks just like Billy Joel. He looked at my wife and he said, we'll talk after the focus groups are over. We did the focus groups, reconvened. And my wife said, well, I guess we're doing negative commercials, right? So, because they work. And then I put a fair amount of my own money into the first campaign, so we didn't spend a lot of time fundraising, but someone running without that option would have to spend most of their time raising money.
Did you enjoy campaigning? Was that something you knew you would enjoy, or how did you adapt to that?
So I enjoyed the campaigning and going to events, and the best part of my job today is there are three things I'm a little off topic, but there's three things we do every day as a member of Congress. Typically, we have 2 vote series a day. We have committee hearings, which are a complete waste of time, and we meet with people. We meet with people that are on the Hill advocating for their issues. We meet with people in the back of the district. We go to schools and talk to students. We talk to groups about maybe someone's advocating for more money for cancer research, or people are coming in advocating for more money for special education needs, or whatever it might be. That's the most rewarding part of the job, is to meet with people and listen to their issues. And I'm very proud of one thing, and this sounds like not much of an accomplishment, but almost every week that I'm in D.C., I'll be in meetings with constituents or advocacy groups that are on the Hill, and it'll be an afternoon meeting, and they're 15-minute meetings, and we do 20 a day. And the person will say to me, Congressman, this is our 7th meeting today, and you're the first member we actually got to meet with. Because usually the members hand it off to the staff. And to listen to people's stories is really, so same thing on the campaign trail. You get to meet with people and find out what they're thinking. And the bad part is you'll be in some grocery store and someone will yell across the produce section, I never vote for you, you're a bum, and, hope you are, hope you rot in hell. Okay, have a nice day, So.
That actually happens. You're just out grocery shopping, and
I go to this one grocery store near our house called Plum Market, and I don't know if this lady just stalks me there or what, but I've run into her 3 times, and I'll look up and I'm picking out peaches or whatever. Hey, you again? How you doing? Yeah, you still hate me? Okay, I got it. All right, good.
Maybe you could tell her, there's a special on sour grapes today.
So the one time I went off script, because you're supposed to never engage or, respond to people attacking you. You're just supposed to smile and take their best shot and move on. But I was at the airport, and I'm getting ready to fly back to D.C., and this woman walked up to me, and she said, Congressman Trott, and she's with her daughter, 10-year-old daughter, and she said, Congressman Trott, would you mind if we got a picture with you? And she wasn't smiling. She just said, would you mind if we got a picture with you? And I said, sure. And something from the get-go was wrong about it. She didn't look like someone that liked me, but she had her daughter, so I didn't imagine she wanted to create a scene in front of her daughter. So I thought, this doesn't seem right, but we're going to pose for a picture. And I was actually there with my mother-in-law, 80-year-old mother-in-law. I was bringing her to D.C. for a dinner that I got invited to at the Library of Congress. I thought she would enjoy. So the lady hands my mother-in-law this phone to take the picture, and we posed for the picture, and she says, you should hold more town halls. And so as soon as she said that, I went, oh, okay, here we got the, this is the indivisible group that's at work here. And okay, I said, well, I held a town hall last month. She goes, I know, I was there. And the town hall was 500 people screaming at me, right? Which people said, my wife saw it. She said, oh, that was horrible. I said, no, it was actually a pretty interesting intellectual exercise not to lose my cool and to answer people yelling at me. So I didn't mind the town hall at all. She goes, yeah, I know, I was there. And I said, well, it was a complete waste of time. And she goes, yeah, it was. And I said, well, why do you think it was a waste of time? She said, because you didn't answer any of our questions. I said, no. I said, I'm not good at many aspects of this job, but I do a better job than almost anyone at answering questions. Most politicians, you ask them a question about something they want to talk about, they pivot to something else, right? And I answered the questions. So I said, no, they're a waste of time because 5 words in every answer, people just started yelling and screaming at me. And she said, well, Justin Amash, who is not someone she would likes, but he's a very conservative member in West Michigan, he holds a lot of town halls. She says, he holds a lot of town halls. You should follow his example. So I said, well, maybe you should move to Grand Rapids then.
So on what dartboard do you think your picture is, your photograph?
Well, so then fast forward, not to bore you with this silly story, but I fly to D.C., I sit in my office, I sit down. The minute I sit down, my comms director comes in, and she goes, well, I guess you met Abby Vargas. And I said, that woman at the airport was Abby Vargas? This is a woman who just hates me, is always on Facebook posting things about me. And so she immediately put the picture of us on her Facebook page and said, I met my congressman. He told me to move to Grand Rapids.
Nothing wrong with Grand Rapids.
Yeah, it's a great town. She'd love it there.
So what happened? You got elected. I'm sure that you had a great celebration. Maybe the family had some consternation. And then what happens? You have to figure out where you're going to live, and then do you just get swept up into a process here? Here's your office. Here are your committees.
Yeah.
Or how does all?
So it's an interesting process. I describe it as similar to first week of orientation at college. So you get elected. We got elected on November 6th or whatever, and then the following week, November 11th, we're in D.C. for a week-long orientation. There are 57 new members in the 114th Congress, 49 Republicans, 8 Democrats. We're all together. We're learning about committee assignments. We're learning about what it means when the whip wants to do a head count for votes. We're learning about the parliamentary procedures for how to speak on the floor. We're trying to find a place to live, although out of 435 members, there's probably 100 that live in their office. I knew that wasn't, be real hard to get my wife to come visit and say, come on, help me blow up the air mattress here. That's gonna be great. Plus there are mice in all the offices. And then it's a process you're getting oriented to, but it was exciting. And actually, one of the more interesting, not to tell you silly stories, but it's a funny story. They jammed us all in this conference room in the Rayburn House office building for the office selection process. And it's a lottery. So it's 10:30 in the morning, everyone goes up and pulls a number out, and you have 4 hours to go look at all the open offices because people have traded up and gotten better offices who've been there for a while. So you go look at all the offices, then you come back at 2:30, and they start calling the numbers. And so the guy running it, and it's a big room, and there's 200 reporters there because they all want to take pictures because they kind of make a game out of it. Who got the first pick and who gets the last pick. And so the guy running it, he said, now I've been doing this for 30 years, and let's talk about a couple things. If you want to have some fun, there's some lucky thing you do to maybe before you draw a number that'll bring you good luck, feel free to do it. The press is here. Let's have some fun. And I'm going to have you come back at 2:30, and I'm going to call the numbers, and whatever's on the board, you got to pick one of those. You can't hem and haw. And if you're not here at 2:30, you'll go to the end of the line, although that's never happened in 30 years. So we disperse as we do the number drawing. And so Tom MacArthur from New Jersey goes up, and he's shorter than me. He's probably 5'6". He's a little overweight. He's bald. So he gets up there, and before he draws the number, he rubs his belly. He rubs the top of his head. He reaches in. He draws the number 52. Terrible draw. So no good luck there. Gwen Graham, for some of them from Florida, Congresswoman from Florida. Her dad was a senator and governor from Florida, Bob Graham. Gwen's now running for the governor's office in Florida. She gets up, and she walks up this narrow little path to the box with the numbers in it, and she's got a staff person with her. And I said, my wife was there. I said, my wife, I don't know why she's got a staff person. She's just reaching in to draw a number out of a box. What does she need a staff person with her? And the staff person's in front of her. He's a tall, thin guy. And about halfway towards the front of the room, he stops. He turns around. She says, are you ready? And he says, yep. And he does a standing backflip and plants it. Whoa. It's unbelievable. And then she goes up and draws the number 6. So she got a good draw.
So everybody had to do a backflip?
No, no one, yeah.
So you get your office that way. I didn't realize that. I thought there was some sort of influence that went on in getting a good, what about if you tick off the leadership? Can you get a bad office then? Can they move you down?
No, they can't affect that, but they'll, so when Boehner was the speaker, some people on the Rules Committee didn't follow the program, and they got kicked off the Rules Committee. Jason Chaffetz, who I just ran into this weekend down in Florida, I think one of the reasons why he quit Congress was his bills in the Judiciary Committee were dead on arrival because of his relationship with Boehner. And so leadership doesn't have nearly the clout it did back when Sam Rayburn was the speaker. Largely because if you look at our 241 Republicans in the House, it's like herding cats. I mean, you've got the Freedom Caucus that are basically the Tea Party folks that were elected in 2010. You got the Tuesday group, the moderates like myself that want to raise issues that you got the social conservatives that are very concerned about certain issues, and so to get 218 votes in the House is near impossible. I will tell you, whether you like Paul Ryan or not. His job is the toughest job in Washington. The Senate, it's understandable how they have challenges because they need 60 votes on most things. The House, 218, we really don't have a governing majority.
Yeah.
And then with the president that we have, it's just the problems exacerbated even more because of his failure of leadership.
So you join the Tuesday group, and that gives you kind of a cohort, does it?
Yeah, so again, we're way into the weeds in this, but the Freedom Caucus, for example, there's 40 people in there, and if 80% of those 40 people agree to vote a certain way on a bill that's coming up, then all 40 have to vote that way, so it's a block. The Tuesday group, we don't have, we describe as we haven't forfeited our voting card to anyone, so we can still decide how we want to vote. There's also some other groups, some little bit of good news. I mean, there's all kinds of, if you do a polling on this question, 88% of the country wants us to accomplish things in a bipartisan fashion, which we don't hardly ever do on the important issues. And so I've joined the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a bipartisan caucus. And the rule for the Problem Solvers Caucus is if you're going to join, you've got to go in with a Democrat. It's 1 for 1. So I went in with Debbie Dingell from Michigan. And so we're trying to find ways to be more constructive and come up with solutions that defy some of the partisanship. But
so how about committee assignments? We talked about how you got your office. Then is the committee the next major thing?
So the committee is like rushing a fraternity. And so you go and meet with the committee chair, who's probably been in Congress for 20 years. They don't really want to meet with you, but they have to, and so they sit there and listen to you. And so it's like going to a fraternity house and saying, I really think I could be a good addition to the house, and I know how to tap a keg, and I can, and they listen to you. So you would think that, my background is in financial services. I, had a mortgage underwriting company that was one of the largest in the country. We have a large title insurance agency. We did real estate law for the financial services industry, and on and on. So I thought I'd go on the Financial Services Committee. Financial Services Committee is an A committee. There are 3 A committees: Ways and Means, our tax committee, Energy and Commerce, Financial Services. Appropriations used to be an A++ committee, the most important committee, but that's when we had earmarks and money. Now we don't have either. And so I thought I'd get on Financial Services. You would think someone's background would be the determinative factor on what committee they go on. That's about the 5th most important factor. So Financial Services and the other 8 committees are the best fundraising committees with the PAC community. So the people that got chosen over me in the 114th Congress for Financial Services were in we're going to have tough re-elections in 2016, so they needed a better fundraising committee. So I was on Judiciary and Foreign Affairs, great committees, and then this Congress I'm on Financial Services.
So you've been on 3 committees, and does that define pretty much the focus of your, I'll call it your intellectual effort, sort of what the kinds of issues that you try to learn and really understand?
No, you can certainly, work on an issue outside of your committee. What it does do, though, is your best chance of getting a bill moved through committee into the floor and put on the schedule for a vote is if it's coming out of the committee where you're at. So I had a bill, the United States has some of the weakest laws in the country regarding female genital mutilation, and we had 100 cases in Detroit over the years where that was happening, FGM, and so I introduced a bill and got it passed out of the Judiciary Committee to triple the penalties relating to FGM. and that was through the Judiciary Committee, and it's probably going to move to the floor. It's actually a bill that could end up on the president's desk because Senator Grassley and Senators Feinstein are going to introduce an identical bill and just to increase the penalties to.
So that was your bill?
Right.
And is that something you were able to work on while you were on the Judiciary Committee?
No, just a bill we worked on, introduced, and then Chairman Goodlatte thought it was a good bill.
Was it helpful to you that you had been on the Judiciary?
Yeah, probably was, yeah.
You had the contacts and that sort of thing? So what kinds of issues, so in your first couple of years there then, you were on Judiciary and you were on Foreign Affairs. I mean, those are two big areas. What kinds of things did you become interested in?
So Judiciary is, covers the largest gamut of issues of any committee in Congress, from intellectual property to copyright law to patent law to criminal law to immigration, constitutional issues. And so Judiciary was a very busy committee, very partisan committee. So there's, we'd have not too many votes where there would be any Democrats supporting the bills. And of course, the only bills reported out of the committee were bills that Republicans wanted to get reported out because we had the majority. By comparison, Foreign Affairs, a very bipartisan committee. Most of our votes were unanimous or close to it. The only wild card we have on the Foreign Affairs Committee is Dana Rohrabacher. I don't know if any of you are from California, but he just loves Russia. So he was constantly, anytime a Republican or Democrat would criticize Russia, Dana would jump in and say that they're misunderstood. And it really sounds like some of the crazy stuff Trump says about Russia, that by mean to them, we're only complicating the relationship. That was even before the meddling in the election, right? So, but Foreign Affairs, for me, I have a large Armenian population. So one of the bills that we're trying to push in last Congress and this Congress is to have the United States finally recognize what happened in 1915 as a genocide. Then Senator Obama said he would call it a genocide, but then because of the relationship with Turkey, he backed off of that, as many of his predecessors have done. I have real concerns about the ability to get that through this Congress, even if it were to get there. That could be one bill that Trump wouldn't sign because he has this respect for Erdogan. I can't figure that out, right?
So you're on the House Judiciary Committee. They don't confirm. Obviously, they don't confirm judicial appointees. So you don't have that.
No. I have jokes for everything. I apologize. So I'm home. One of my buddies comes up to me. He says, "Trotter, you're on the Judiciary Committee." This is back my first Congress. Yep. He says, "That's great. You get to confirm all the judges, right?" And I said, "No, that's the Senate Judiciary Committee." I said, "But if we were to impeach Obama, it would come to our committee, and we get to deal with the articles of impeachment." And I never wanted to impeach Obama. I will be somewhat remiss if some of the Democrats are able to move forward and try and impeach Trump, because that would be a fascinating place to be, the House Judiciary Committee.
All right. But these are sort of hot-button pieces of legislation. They involve some of the most controversial things that we deal with. So
in Judiciary, particularly immigration, would be probably the most hot topic that we could never make any progress on.
And so do you welcome that kind of issue? Do you say, like, look, this is why I'm here, this is really interesting, or do you say, holy cow, I'll make as many enemies as friends, this is not good for me? What's your thought?
So it's a great question. It depends on what you're there for. So I have a good friend in the Michigan delegation who had an opportunity to go on the Appropriations Committee. And even though we don't have a budget and appropriations process that has worked in decades, I think we've only passed a budget under the Budget Control Act twice in '74 that actually went through the whole appropriations process the way it should. He didn't want to be on the appropriations process because when they're marking up the approps bills, they have to take a lot of tough votes. And so maybe they're in a very socially conservative district, but they're going to have to vote to support a budget that funds Planned Parenthood. And he says, I don't want to be any part of that. For me, I didn't have goals of running for statewide office. I didn't think, and candidly, if I'd run this next time, I would have been reelected. It would have just been a grind. But I didn't have any concerns about, I wanted to be on the immigration subcommittee because I thought if we're going to work on it, that would be a great place to be. And if I upset some people because I wanted to deal with DACA the right way and some of my Republican voters, I would just have to raise more money to get my message out in the next campaign.
So you've thrown out a few hints here. So let's, and I imagine people are like, why didn't he run again? Okay, so let's start with the smallest of the things that I heard you say, which was the committee hearings are a total waste of time. Why is that?
Great question. So I want to talk before I leave with the House historian, because if you go back to Congress, if you come visit the Hill, there's 3 office buildings: Cannon, Longworth, and Rayburn. I'm in Longworth. It used to be Cannon was the only House office building, and it used to be if you go into a Cannon House office building, right now you walk in, there's a lobby and maybe a little office for the chief or a couple people behind that, and then to the left there'll be 6 or so staff people in there, and then to the right is a big office that's the member's office. It used to be back in the day, that big office that was the member's office was the entire office for that congressperson. And they might have their desk and then maybe a desk or 2 in front of them, but they were all in one big room back in the day. And my theory is that when they had committee hearings, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, and they had 3 expert witnesses in front of them, they really wanted to pick that person's brain to try and, if I'm doing criminal law, criminal justice reform, and I've got Professor Beal in front of me, I really want to get your thoughts on what we should do about how to deal with juvenile crime and what changes we can make, because we know that putting them in prison doesn't accomplish what we need to accomplish, right? Today, it's already been baked in the committee room. And so what we're doing in most of these hearings is it's all for show. And I'll tell you a personal story that maybe you won't be impressed by, but it's the truth. But today, if Professor Beal's there and you're the Democratic witness and I'm on the Republican side of the equation, I may not ask you any questions because I don't want to hear to give you an opportunity to give your side of the story, because that's just free airtime for you. Or if I do ask you questions, it's going to be to try and show me attacking your views so that my team can capture that 30-second soundbite and blast it out on social media and have all my supporters back home say, look at that Trott, he's doing a good job. My personal example of that comes from my then 20-year-old daughter, who was out in California in college, and she texts me and she says, Dad, you're trending on Facebook. And I said, I don't know what that means, Courtney. Is that good or bad? And she goes, it's good. It's your 15 seconds of fame, and here's how it came to be. I'm on Judiciary. We have General Lynch in front of our committee, who I believe was your commencement speaker, perhaps.
That is right.
And so she's in front of the committee. I had been forewarned that, and she's by herself, just testifying in front of the Judiciary Committee about the status of matters in the Justice Department. And I had been told that she was the worst witness that ever came before the committee before I got there. And so to be prepared for a lot of pivoting, she wouldn't answer any questions. So I had a staff person come to the meeting, the committee hearing, and I'm a fairly junior member at that point, so I get to ask my questions in hour 5, right? And my staff person's there, and I said, Bridget, I want you to keep track of how many times General Lynch says, I don't know, or I'm not sure what you mean, or I can't answer that question, or I don't recall. How many times she refuses to answer the question. So we start with my questioning, and my questioning had to do with the decision to not pursue Hillary's emails and all that, and the decision to recuse herself from Comey's investigation. And she started saying, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm not sure. And I said, General Lynch, I said, I knew you wouldn't answer any of our questions today. And so I had a staff person keep track, and this is the 74th time you said, I don't know. And I said, and I made well, I got a lot of kudos back home for that. It was not a good use of 5 hours of time, right? True story, so.
Okay. So what about on foreign affairs? Where was the, oh no, I was asking you about the hints that you'd thrown out. Okay, so one was, why are the committee hearings? So,
right.
Okay, the second, you've made some comments about President Trump, who's, I suppose leader of your party. Not in the Tuesday Club.
Yeah.
No.
He's not in any club.
No.
Except his own.
Okay, so what happened? How do you experience him? What are your thoughts?
Well, so everything I say about Trump, I should preface it with, I've been wrong about Trump for 3 years, right? I never thought he'd get the nomination. I never thought he'd win. And then I thought once he got there, he would evolve into the office, having been a somewhat successful CEO, though I would submit his organization is not nearly what it represents itself to be. He's made a lot of money branding his name. He's a marketing genius. He's not maybe a talented CEO, but he ran some pretty good-sized companies, so maybe I thought he would evolve into the job. His cabinet, not perfect, but pretty good cabinet. We can argue about that, and there's some people that maybe, give me pause, like Betsy DeVos and a few other people. But Mad Dog Mattis and Tillerson's been a disappointment. But the cabinet is solid. The West Wing is a disaster. He's got family and friends in there. He started out with, Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus as his co-chief of staff. And so I forgot your question, Dean, I apologize, but I just gave a speech where I said, with apologies to David Letterman, the top 10 things that bug me about Donald Trump, so I can go on for a long time about him. But he hasn't evolved into the job, and so his leadership skills, he's just particularly ill-suited to be president. And, by comparison, I met President Obama several times. I never agreed with a lot of what President Obama wanted to do, but I always felt like he knew what he was talking about. He had a principled core that, again, I had issues with some of his positions and solutions, but I think I thought his ideas were well thought out. When we voted on the House health care plan, which was, not a very good bill, but I don't think the president knew a single thing about that bill. I think he understands a little more about the tax reform proposal, but he's not. I gave a speech recently. I said I wish he used Google more than Twitter. I meant it. Yeah.
So what the other thing you sort of suggested is that you had reasons for not running again, in addition to your family circumstances. And so what made you decide not to run again?
Well, that was the driver, but then, spending a year on the campaign trail explaining and defending Donald Trump, I think we're, looking at a particularly difficult midterm election. If I had to bet, I think the Dems pick up the 24 seats to win control of the House in 2018. And the party line would have to be to go home and ignore the president. And I couldn't defend him, but at a minimum, if I'm running for re-election, I've got to ignore the president and not talk about what he's doing or saying. And I have a hard time doing that, as you can see. So I decided the best thing for me to do was to, we have a family foundation I'm going to spend more time working in, and I think there are better ways for me to make a difference. And everyone assumes it's the height of dysfunction in Washington, and I would say we are dysfunctional. That being said, I didn't go there expecting to find a high-functioning body. Right? I mean, I knew there would be some real challenges. I think it's particularly challenging right now because here's the dynamic. I've disparaged the president. Let me take a shot at the Democrats now. In Nancy Pelosi, her strategy, which is exactly what she should be doing, is she wants to make sure we accomplish nothing between now and November of 18. Because her mantra is going to be, and her message is going to be, see, the Republicans had a chance to control. They had control of everything, and they haven't been able to do a darn thing. And it's part because they have a leader who's crazy, and the Senate's dysfunctional, and the House can't pass anything. That's the message. Some would say that's what the Republicans tried to do to Obama, or did to President Obama. So we may or may not get tax reform done, but once we come back in January after the holidays, it's election season. We're not going to get anything done on immigration. We're not probably going to be able to put together a bipartisan solution on health care like we should. So that's a factor too. The dysfunction is going to go on in perpetuity. Winston Churchill said the United States eventually gets it right after they've tried everything else. And we're now in a phase where we're trying everything else. And I do worry about our ability to get away from the partisanship. And the partisanship is a function of two problems. So first, you've got these gerrymandered districts where people, particularly Republicans in the South and Democrats in urban areas, all they've got to worry about is, I don't want to get primaried. So I got to be progressive or conservative enough so I don't get primaried. If I don't get primaried, I win 70-30. If I get primaried because I'm not conservative enough, because I voted for, and there's no tolerance. It's perfect is the enemy of good. You can't vote for a bill that's good if it has some in it that's unacceptable to the far right or the far left. So yeah, everything has to be perfect. Well, this is, Reagan sat down with Tip O'Neill once a week and had lunch, and Reagan's attitude was, I'd rather get 70% of what I want than nothing. And we're in a nothing phase right now. So the gerrymander, you got to get rid of these safe districts and make them more competitive, because if I'm now in a 52-48 district, I've got to come home and I can't say to you, hey, I voted to repeal Obamacare and I stopped that, even though we didn't do anything. I voted no on this. You'd have to come home, instead of saying what I stopped from happening, you'd have to come home and say, here's what I got done. So get rid of gerrymandering. Then the other big thing that would have to change would be you'd have to revisit the Citizens United case and campaign finance. Because right now, 50% of the job is raising money. If I'm going to run for re-election in 2018, I've got to raise $3 million between now and 2018. After the first campaign, my wife said, now we're done self-funding here, right? You're going to raise the money going forward. Oh, yeah, and I said I would. But I got to go raise. So being here today, candidly, I would say, well, Dean, is there a group of folks that could hold a lunch for me? Or do a dinner reception where I could raise $25,000 bucks?
I was thinking the same thing, but for the law school.
Yeah, well, I toured my wife, because of her involvement with children, I got a very great discussion about everything that's being done at the Children's Law Clinic, and so our foundation is going to make a gift, and I look forward to making that happen because it's very impressive what they're doing.
Well, if you were running, I'm sure I could have put together So, how do we, well, first of all, why aren't you a better gerrymanderer? Well, your district apparently is a...
R4, yeah, R+4.
I don't know what that means, but
it should be 52, 53, 47, yeah.
But it leaves you vulnerable.
It does, right?
Yeah.
Especially my district is the suburbs around Detroit. So if you look at the Virginia governor's race last week, where Northam won, he won because of all the moderates and independents in Northern Virginia and the suburbs outside of D.C. They all voted for the Democrat, and that's my district.
So you're making the case that gerrymandering has had these very bad effects on the ability or willingness of the two-party system to work together, essentially. And you make a very compelling case. Is that something that Congress should fix, or is that something that you say, well, Congress just can't fix it because it's the nature of the beast, so the courts have to step in here?
Well, the courts have stepped in. I mean, there's a case.
It's been argued.
And
under submission.
Yeah, I don't know that Congress can fix it. I think the courts, if they conclude it's a problem, then I guess we'll have to come up with a legislative solution based on that. But some of the citizens panels they're talking about, those could be partisan too. So I don't know what the solution is. Haven't candidly studied it because it's not something that it's not going to come up in the 115th Congress, that's for sure.
I don't think it's going to come up in 115 years, frankly.
Perhaps
I think it's
not.
either the courts or it's just the political system, probably. What about in the foreign affairs area? We're in a period here where it does feel perilous, shall we say. Is that something, do you have views on that?
Yeah, so it's a huge concern. I had issues with President Obama because I felt like his approach to foreign policy was if you read some of his books, kind of suggests that the United States should feel guilty about the role we've played in the world stage. I don't agree with that at all. So I think we need to be a leader in the world stage, and this lead from behind philosophy I never subscribed to. And that being said, some of the things now in hindsight that President Obama did make some pretty good sense, like the TPP and the trade agreement with the Pacific Rim, and maybe even the deal with Iran, which I was very critical of, and maybe still need to revisit. But today we got big problems. I mean, we talk about North Korea. It's not Donald Trump's fault. It's not Obama's fault. I mean, that's been percolating for 20 years, and there's now no good solution. I had lunch recently with Mike Rogers, the former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, and he's now with CNN and does various things, and he's a good friend. And I said, Mike, is the only solution on North Korea to take Kim Jong-un out? Is that the only solution, to have him, figure out, I know Pompeo says there's a bunch of, Pompeo was being interviewed on some show, our CIA director, and I have a lot of respect for him. He's a very bright guy. But he asked about North Korea, and he goes, well, we have a lot of covert operations going on, so stay tuned. Well, they're not covert anymore, right? I mean, and Mike said the problem with that is all the generals underneath, the dictator is acting the way he is because, in part, if he shows any weakness, the generals will take him out because they want the money for the military. So what's the solution there? I don't think raising the tension like President Trump has is a good solution. Calling him Rocket Man and trying to call him, to get him exercised. So that worries me. Russia is there's no friend to us, and McCain, everything he says about Russia is absolutely correct. By the way, if you want to know where Congress needs to go get a copy out of the Congressional Record of John McCain's speech on the floor of the House on July 27th, the night before he did the famous no vote on health care. That speech really says it best. And people, the way Congress, the Senate, and we're supposed to work is it's supposed to be through compromise. And it's supposed to be an open process where amendments are voted on. And none of these amendments, for example, on the tax reform bill are going to be considered in the House floor. None of the Democratic amendments. And then you look at Russia, you look at the Middle East, not to worry, we've got Jared Kushner. Well, he's going to handle that for us. And he's studying up on it, so he's got a little ways to go before he's ready to come out with his ultimate deal. No, there's a lot of problems. And then China, of course, is the gorilla in the room. They probably already have surpassed us as the world's superpower in terms of certainly their economy. And they have a nationalistic tendency that really will compromise our standing in the world. And there's economic consequences to that. And if you look at a place like the South China Sea and what they're doing, building islands on top of coral, that could impact trade and shipping lanes. And then a country like the Philippines, they're going to have to figure out, can I really afford to be friends with the U.S.? I think China's more important to me.
I'm just speaking for myself, but probably some other people in the room. It's depressing to think that somebody who's thoughtful and moderate like you just feels that you can't really survive in that job for much more than 4 years.
Well, again, the explanation is funny because my press release said I want to spend more time with my family. So my wife's at the same grocery store, and someone comes up to her and says, and my wife's name is Kathleen, but everyone calls her Cappy, K-P-P-Y. And so it's Cappy. I read Dave's not running, and he's going to spend more time with his family. Is he sick or is there a scandal? There's got to be some other story, right? And so that's the reason. Candidly, if my wife came to D.C. and was there most of the time, I would be running again just because I would enjoy serving for 10 or 20 years. But for me, it's just not the right time in my life to be doing it. And I caution all of you, you're going to graduate and start practicing law or go into business. I kind of went more of a business route, and that's got some advantages too. But there's a time and place for everything in your life. And I went to our son's, this is a funny story, a little off topic, but when our son started college, they took all the kids away, and then they put the parents in a big room like this, and the two school psychologists came and talked to the parents. And the message the psychologists shared with us were, these two women, they're very enlightening, and they said, now this is a stressful time for your son and daughter starting college, and you need to also realize it's a stressful time for all of you too, because your son or daughter is leaving home, and you need, so she said two things. She said, if after you leave your son or daughter today and you're heading to the airport and you decide this is the time I should tell my spouse exactly how unhappy I've been over the last 18 years.
Not good timing.
Think it through a little bit. Wait 2 weeks because maybe there's some emotions regarding your son or daughter leaving that's really at play here. And the other message was the lady talked about she was going to be Linda Ronstadt, and her goal was to be a pop star singer. And she said, I was about 50 years old and I finally realized sometimes you have to let some dreams go. And there's a lesson in that too.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody got that? Okay. So let's talk financial services. So, Dodd-Frank, the whole post to what do we call it? 09 event. So that's something you have a good feeling for. Right. You think we're well structured now, or do we have a ways to go, or how do you see that?
So, Dodd-Frank was an overreaction to the crisis of 08 and 09, in my opinion. The CFPB run by Cordray is far afield of what it should be doing. It's the mafia. It's what it is today, and it's not, in my opinion, serving its purpose. So we're doing some reforms. Now the problem is we got Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, so she's not going to let any of the reforms happen. And we'll need 60 votes to get the reforms done, and there'll never be 60 votes in the Senate, so we're kind of stymied. This is an example of some Republican bipartisanship that didn't work. Chairman of our committee is a guy named Jeb Hensling, a very ideologically conservative, very disciplined guy. But he tried with Elizabeth Warren to work on a solution to reform the CFPB. I don't want to get too far into it, but the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was the bureau created under Dodd-Frank to make sure that lenders and credit companies were being fair to consumers. Good idea, because some of the products coming out of the 08, 09 crisis were bad products, subprime products, and consumers really got hurt by them. And again, we handled, hundreds of thousands of foreclosures, so, I'm living proof of what happened. And I never apologized for my prior life, but it's certainly a good point of attack for people that hate me. But it's not on budget, so it's not subject to the appropriations process. Cordray is a czar. He can't be removed for any reason, basically, unless for cause. And it's unlike most other agencies and bureaus in the federal government. Well, they need to be put on budget. They should be subject to a bipartisan commission. And you would think with Cordray's term ending next summer that maybe Elizabeth Warren would come in and say, okay, I want to cut a deal now because I know the next person that gets appointed is going to be a Republican-leaning director. And so we need to make some changes. And for example, you have a community bank or a credit union that knows their member or their borrower. They've been in the community for 30 years. They can't make a mortgage to that person if it doesn't qualify as a qualified mortgage, and there's no safe harbor if they lend outside of those parameters. Well, if that loan's not going to be sold to Fannie or Freddie and it's not an FHA loan or a VA loan, what does it matter? It's private enterprise. Let them put them on their books, and the bank makes a bad decision, then the shareholders or the members of the credit union will suffer the loss accordingly. So some of Dodd-Frank really undermines free enterprise concepts, in my opinion, and ultimately hurts consumers insofar as it makes credit that much more difficult to obtain.
Do you have any views on the tax bill that's making its way through? I'm interested in the university part.
Yeah, your government relations guy gave me a full earful this morning, giving me a tour of the. I thought we were just going to look at the chapel, and he wanted to talk about tax reform.
Isn't that the right location?
Yeah. So there's some real. It's a perfect example of bad policy percolating, and it's a completely partisan exercise. It's being rushed to the finish line. We're going to vote on it this week. It's being rushed to the finish line because we got to get a win out of Congress for the president by the end of the year. Otherwise, we go into election season next year, nothing will get done, we'll lose the House. So that's the driver, candidly. We're going to pass a bill out of the House that has some good things in it. It keeps, in my opinion, if you look at the top tax bracket of individual bracket of 39.6%, a lot of Republicans wanted to lower that. We don't need to lower that. We look, last 10, 20 years, rich people in this country have done just fine. So I supported the president's desire to keep that tax bracket. It greatly simplifies a lot of people, 9 out of 10 people are going to be able to do their tax return on a postcard, basically. A little bit of an exaggeration, but not too much. It does work on corporate tax rates, which are not being reduced as dramatically as you think. They're 35% to 20%. The average effective rate for most corporations is 18 to 25%, so it's going to get lowered down a little bit, but it'll make it simpler for corporations to be competitive here. Maybe help them return more money back to the U.S. and not give them a reason to leave. But there's a lot of bad stuff in it, and the bad stuff has absolutely no policy justification. It's just a money grab. The excise tax on income from endowments. Duke, I asked the guy this morning, Chris, what it would cost Duke. He thinks $10 to $20 million a year. That's
real money.
Some of the way that some of tuition is not going to be taxed, benefits are going to be taxed for students and grad students. So the good news is we're going to pass something in the House this week, and it's going to be completely irrelevant in a month because the Senate is going to do whatever they're going to do. And every senator thinks that, they wake up every morning, they look at themselves in the mirror and they think they should be president, right? And then every senator and every policy issue believes that their idea is the best idea and their name should be attached to that solution. And so they will ignore what comes out of the House. Mark my words, I'm going to make you 2 predictions here, okay? And you're going to look back and go, that Trott guy, he was really bright. Maybe he should be the next dean. Who knows? So
there's an opening.
Yeah. 2 predictions. Senate's going to pass a bill that'll be totally different, significantly different than the House. It's going to come rolling back into the House in December. The leader is going to call us together, and the speaker is going to say to us, we would like to go to conference and reconcile the 2 bills and send that bill, that compromise bill to the president's desk, but we don't have time. So we just need to vote on the Senate bill and pass it so we can get something to the president's desk. And the speaker will use the holidays. We're supposed to recess on December 14th, and Kevin McCarthy will stand up and say, we're going to stay here as long as it takes, including Christmas, to get something done. We're not leaving until we pass something so the president can sign it. And so everyone will fall in line and probably vote to pass the Senate tax reform bill. And the president will sign whatever he sends them. He has no, again, philosophical core, in my opinion. So whatever we send him, he'll sign it, right? And then we'll have tax reform hopefully by the end of the year. It won't be, it really is tax cuts, it's not tax reform. But hopefully the simplification and some of the corporate benefits will be a good thing. The second prediction I'll make for you is, we have a presidential election that people are already starting to talk about because they're so concerned about it. And I think that we got some strong headwinds as Republicans, because I live in the museum building at 6th and Pennsylvania in D.C. And there's a woman across the hall. She's a consultant for Deloitte, very successful. This is a nice apartment building, very successful woman. And she told me one time, initially she would be attacking me in the elevator for being, a Republican.
You've survived a lot of this.
Yeah. I think, because I know in their hearts, they all really do like me. But I don't think so. I got her off attacking me, but she did say to me one time, I wake up every morning, and the first thing I think about, and the thing I try and work on all day whenever I have time, is to make sure Donald Trump doesn't last as our president. The Democrats are so energized after the 2016 election, and that's really what you saw in Virginia, in my opinion. So we got this election coming up in 2020. I'm not sure if President Pence will be running or Trump will still be there. You can speculate on that. But that being said, the Democrats are going to have their own folly. They're going through it right now. I think they're as unorganized and there's as much acrimony there as there's been in the Republican Party in recent years. But they're going to have 20 people running for president, and they're going to have a lot of progressive folks running. Out of the 20, there'll be 17 people that are progressive, maybe not as progressive as Bernie, but they'll be out there. And there's one guy you need to keep your eye on. He's a congressman from Maryland, John Delaney. And he's a very successful guy. He had a successful business career, but he's a moderate, and I've co-sponsored just about every one of his bills. He's got a great idea on how to reform Social Security. Social Security is bankrupt. It's legacy costs that this country can't even begin to address. If you talked about it, our national debt of $20 trillion would be dwarfed by some of the Social Security and Medicare costs that we've committed to. His bill is to recreate an idea from Reagan from '86, which is Congress doesn't have the courage to take this problem on. What congressperson is going to vote to take benefits away from old people? They all vote, right? So Reagan in '86 created a commission. It was an up or down vote to reform Social Security last time we did it. And it was an up or down vote, no amendments on the House floor. The commission came back with their solution, and they voted on it. And Delaney and I have a bill to do just that again. Kind of basically Congress outsourcing its problem solution to a commission, and then it comes back and we just vote on it. So Delaney could be a sleeper because he may be the only moderate the Democrats have out there. And he's got a pretty interesting philosophy. He's going to take 25 or 30 million of his own money, and he's probably got 30 million committed from outside groups, Bloomberg being one of them, I believe. And his goal will be to try and come in first or second in Iowa and New Hampshire. If he does that, then the rest will fall into place. But keep your eye on John Delaney.
John Delaney.
Yeah.
Okay, we heard it here. And I think when, after you've had your time off and you decide to run for Senate, perhaps, maybe we'll have a dinner party here for you.
Okay, I'll look forward to it.
Invite everybody in the room here. Okay, we can take one question, but it has to be like a crisp, short question. Okay.
So you recently introduced legislation on bump stock, regulating those after the Vegas shooting, and I'm curious on your thoughts why that really hasn't gained any traction with your colleagues, and if you see any prospect in the future for any bipartisan reform.
Yeah.
Okay, bum stocks.
Yep, great question. So, and the question is it was a crisp question. My answer is going to be not as crisp, but.
You have 1 minute.
So, I think it will gain traction. So stay tuned. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation with the congresswoman from Vegas, who was it was her district where the terrible shooting occurred, and I think it will gain traction. And here's why: the NRA, and I'm not a gun person, and don't believe everything you read on Wikipedia, please. I got to update that. The NRA will not let any bill come to the floor that bans anything. The word ban frightens the heck out of the NRA. They did tacitly give permission to House leadership to take up a bill that would give ATF the ability to write regulations to deal with bump stock and other modifications to guns that greatly increase the firing capability of weapons. And so our bill is the only bill that will, and it will not ultimately solve the problem, but our bill will be the only bill that the House leadership will take up on the floor that will give ATF the right to write the regulations that will deal with getting rid of bump stocks and other future altercations to, modifications to weapons. As an aside, I think, getting a gun should be as hard to get a gun as it should be to get a driver's license, wouldn't you think?
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay, all right.